Coverage continues of the GOP debate here tonight. Simi Valley, California, at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library beneath the huge Air Force One Boeing 707. I'm with John Harris of the website Politico, and we would be remiss, of course, any gathering in this space would, without a mention, perhaps a short tribute to one of the most important people here tonight. The legacy represented here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Library is impressive. Over 1 million photos, 60 million pages of documents, tens of thousands of audio and video tapes encompassing the life and work of the late president.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Even this great place can't evoke the full magnitude and spirit of Ronald Reagan's life like his partner.
I was very blessed to find him.
Mrs. Reagan has always said her life started when she met Ronald Wilson Reagan.
On Nancy with a laughing face.
And from that point onward, they tackled everything together.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
All along, Mrs. Reagan was his advisor and champion-in-chief. Their love for one another was an enduring image at the White House. That bond would sustain them through the unthinkable. Though forever shaken, the work of the nation went on. Mrs. Reagan decided to dedicate herself to the Just Say No campaign.
If you're ever offered drugs, please, please, just say no.
It was with great dignity and grace that President Reagan announced in 1994 he'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Each day brings another reminder of this very long goodbye.
Since saying farewell to her companion of over 50 years back in 2004, Mrs. Reagan has stayed active in public life, advocating for stem cell research and devoting herself to the celebration of her husband's life and his lasting legacy. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Nancy Reagan. The questioning continues. John Harris.
Governor Perry, you said you wrote the book Fed Up to start a conversation. Congratulations. It's certainly done that in recent weeks. In the book, you call Social Security the best example of a program that, quote, violently tossed aside any respect for states' rights. We understand your position that it's got funding problems now. I'd like you to explain your view that Social Security was wrong right from the beginning.
Well, I think any of us that want to go back and change 70 years of what's been going on in this country is probably going to have a difficult time. And rather than spending a lot of time talking about what those folks were doing back in the 30s and the 40s is a nice intellectual conversation, but the fact is we got to be focused on how we're going to change this program. And people who are on Social Security today, men and women who are receiving those benefits today are individuals of my age that are on in line pretty quick to get them. They don't need to worry about anything. But I think the Republican candidates are talking about ways to transition this program. And it is a monstrous lie. It is a Ponzi scheme to tell our kids that are 25 or 30 years old today, you're paying into a program that's going to be there. Anybody that's for the status quo with Social Security today is involved with a monstrous lie to our kids, and it's not right.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Let me follow on that. You mentioned the phrase Ponzi scheme. Just this morning, your former political advisor, Karl Rove, said that kind of provocative language could be toxic, as he put it, in a general election. Vice President Cheney gave an interview today to ABC News when he said it's not a Ponzi scheme. Quote, it's a program that a great many people depend on. My understanding is you're standing by every word you've written in that book.
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
You know, Carl has been over the top for a long time in some of his remarks. So, you know, I'm not responsible for Carl anymore. But the fact is,
Vice President Cheney, though, said it's not a Ponzi scheme. You say it is.
Absolutely. If Vice President Cheney or anyone else says that the program that we have in place today and young people who are paying into that expect that program to be sound and for them to receive benefits when they reach retirement age, that is just a lie. And I don't care what anyone says. We know that. The American people know that. But more importantly, those 25 and 30-year-olds know that.
Thank you. Governor Time. Governor Romney, let's be blunt. Let's be blunt. Democrats are itching to use that kind of provocative language against Republicans, yet you acknowledge yourself that Social Security has funding problems. How do you have a candid conversation about Social Security without scaring seniors?
Well, the issue is not the funding of Social Security. We all agree and have for years that the funding program of Social Security is not working, and Congress has been raiding the dollars from Social Security to pay for annual government expenditures. That's wrong. The funding, however, is not the issue. The issue in the book Fed Up, Governor, is you say that by any measure, Social Security is a failure. You can't say that to tens of millions of Americans who live on Social Security and those who have lived on it. The governor says, look, states ought to be able to opt out of Social Security. Our nominee has to be someone who isn't committed to abolishing Social Security, but who's committed to saving Social Security. We have always had at the heart of our party a recognition that we want to care for those in need, and our seniors have the need of Social Security. I will make sure that we keep the program and we make it financially secure. We save Social Security. And under no circumstances would I ever say, by any measure, it's a failure. It is working for millions of Americans, and I'll keep it working for millions of Americans. And we've got to do that as a party.
Thank you, Governor. Governor Perry, a 30-second rebuttal. Governor Romney said Vice President Cheney is right, and you're wrong about Ponzi scheme.
Well, here's, again, we're not trying to pick fights here.
Understood.
We're about fixing things. You can either have reasons or you can have results. And the American people expect us to put results in place. You cannot keep the status quo in place and not call it anything other than a Ponzi scheme. It is. That is what it is. Americans know that. And regardless of what anyone says, oh, it's not, and that's provocative language, maybe it's time to have some provocative language in this country and say things like, let's get America working again and do whatever it takes to make that happen.
John, I think the American people would like to hear a solution.
Okay.
Do you want to hear some more rhetoric, or you want to hear a solution? I happen to believe that, yes, Social Security, it needs fixing, not continuing to talk about it. I believe in the Chilean model, where you give a personal retirement account option so we can move this society from an entitlement society to an empowerment society. Chile had a broken system the way we did 30 years ago. The worker was paying 28 cents on a dollar into a broken system. They finally awakened and put in a system where the younger workers could have a choice. Novel idea. Give them a choice with an account with their name on it, and over time, we would eliminate the current broken system that we have. That is a solution to the problem, rather than continuing to talk about how broken it is. Let's just fix it using the Chilean model.
Thank you. Good. Congressman Paul. We've been talking just now about Governor Perry's rhetoric, but let's talk about his record. Just this morning, your campaign put out a statement accusing him of pushing for bailout money, supporting welfare for illegal immigrants, and trying to forcibly vaccinate 12-year-old girls against sexually transmitted disease. He's your home state governor. Is he less conservative than meets the eye?
Much more so, yes. Just take the HPV. Forcing 12-year-old girls to take an inoculation to prevent this sexually transmitted disease. This is not good medicine, I do not believe. I think it's social misfit. It's not good social policy, and therefore I think this is very bad to do this. But one of the worst parts about that was the way it was done. You know, the governorship in Texas traditionally is supposed to be a weak governorship. I didn't even know they could pass laws by writing an executive order. He did it with an executive order, passed it. The state was furious, and the legislature overwhelmingly, probably 90%, I don't know exactly, overwhelmingly repealed this. But I think it's the way it was passed, which was so bad. I think it's a bad piece of legislation, but I don't like the idea of executive orders. I, as president, will not use the executive order to write laws.
Thank you, Congressman. Governor Perry, we'll get to you, but Congresswoman Bachmann, this is an issue you've also talked about, HPV.
Well, what I'm very concerned about is the issue of parental rights. I think when it comes to dealing with children, it's the parents who need to make that decision. It is wrong for government, whether it's state or federal government, to impose on parents what they must do to inoculate their children. This is very serious, and I think that it's very important, again, that parents have that right. Education reform is another area. That's where I cut my teeth in politics, was being involved in education reform, because the problem you see is one of framing. It's the idea is, should the federal government control these areas, or should parents and localities control these areas? We have the best results when we have the private sector and when we have the family involved. We have the worst results when the federal government gets involved, and especially by dictate to impose something like an inoculation on an innocent 12-year-old girl. I would certainly oppose that.
Thank you. Governor Perry, we've had candidates talking about you.
Yes,
Let's hear from you.
I kind of feel like the piñata here at the party. So,
welcome.
But here's the facts of that issue. There was an opt-out in that piece of, it wasn't legislation, it was an executive order. I hate cancer. We passed a $3 billion cancer initiative that same legislative session, of which we're trying to find over the next 10 years cures to cancers. Cervical cancer is caused by HPV. We wanted to bring that to the attention of these thousands tens of thousands of young people in our state. We allowed for an opt-out. I don't know what's more strong for parental rights than having that opt-out. There's a long list of diseases that cost our state and cost our country. It was on that list. Now, did we handle it right? Should we have talked to the legislature first before we did it? Probably so. But at the end of the day, I will always err on the side of saving lives.
Yes, sir. Senator Santorum, one final note on this book, Fed Up. Governor Perry says in his book that it was, quote, unprincipled for Republicans to vote in favor of creating the Department of Homeland Security. You were one of those Republicans who voted yes. Respond.
We created the Department of Homeland Security because there was a complete mess in the internal in protecting our country. We had all sorts of agencies that had conflicting authority. We had no information sharing that was going on. This was right after 9/11. We saw the problems created as a result of 9/11, and we put together a plan to try to make sure that there was better coordination. I want to get back to this Gardasil issue. You know, we have Governor Perry's out there and claiming about states' rights and states' rights. How about parental rights being more important than states' rights? How about having, instead of an opt-out, an opt-in? If you really cared, you could make the case, instead of forcing me as a parent, and I have 7 children too. The wide receivers here have on the ends here have 7 children each. But I am offended that the government would tell me, and by an executive order, without even going through the process of letting the people have any kind of input. I would expect this from President Obama. I would not expect this from someone who's calling himself a conservative governor.
Time. Governor Romney, you've been listening to this exchange. Who's got the better end of it?
You know, I believe in parental rights and parental responsibility for our kids. My guess is that Governor Perry would like to do it a different way. Second time through, we've each taken a mulligan or two, and my guess is that that's something you'd probably do a little differently. Second time, he just said he'd rather do it through legislation next time through, and I recognize he wanted very badly to provide better health care to his kids and to prevent the spread of cancer. I agree with those who said he went about it in the wrong way, but I think his heart was in the right place. Right now, we have people who on this stage care very deeply about this country. We love America. America's in crisis. We have some differences between us, but we agree that this president's got to go. This president's a nice guy. He doesn't have a clue how to get this country working again. And
Speaker Gingrich, 30 seconds. I have another line of questioning. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to go back, Frank, to the Homeland Security question, because it's important for us to confront this. I helped develop the model for Homeland Security. It hasn't been executed well. The fact is, we have enemies who want to use weapons against us that will lead to disasters on an enormous scale. And the original goal was to have a Homeland Security Department that could help us withstand up to 3 nuclear events in one morning. And we need to understand, there are people out there who want to kill us, and if they have an ability to sneak in weapons of mass destruction, they're going to use them. We need to overhaul and reform the department, but we need some capacity to respond to massive events that could kill hundreds of thousands of Americans in one morning.
Congressman Paul, this same line, you want to abolish the TSA. What would exist in its place?
Well, the airlines are responsible for carrying their cargo and their passengers. I mean, why should we assume that a bureaucracy can do better? And look at the monstrosity we have at the airports. These TSA agents are abusive. Sometimes they're accused of all kinds of sexual activities on the way they maul people at the airports. So the airlines could do that.
I'll give them your best at LAX tonight.
I would think the airlines should treat passengers as well as a company that hauls money around, and they protect their money. They have private guards, and they could do it. Just remember, 9/11 came about because there was too much government. Government was more or less in charge. They told the pilots they couldn't have guns, and they were told never to resist. They set up the stage for all this. So no, private markets do a good job in protecting, much better than this bureaucracy called the TSA. Let me tell you.
Let me ask you about something else. It's related in a way, has to do with Mother Nature. Before the broadcast, Senator Santorum's got flooding today in Pennsylvania. Governor Perry is just back from the wildfires out east. Category 1 storm laid waste to entire areas. There's standing water tonight, Paterson, New Jersey. Many of the towns around where I live, 8 days without power. We had people eating in outdoor and public parks because the supermarkets were closed down. The question is, federal aid, something like FEMA. If you object to what it's become and how's it's run, your position is to remove it, take it away, abolish it. What happens in its absence?
Well, what happened before 1979? We didn't have FEMA, and that FEMA just conditioned people to build where they shouldn't be building. We lose the market effect of that. But yeah, my position is we should have never had it. There's a much better way of doing it. I mean, this whole idea that the federal government can deal with weather and anything in the world, just go to the federal government. FEMA's broke. They're $20 billion in debt. But I'm not for saying tomorrow close it down. A lot of people pay the insurance. I worked real hard to make it work, and I did that in my district too. But I'll tell you how we should do it. We're spending, believe it or not, this blew my mind when I read this, $20 billion a year for air conditioning in Afghanistan and Iraq, in the tents over there, and all the air conditioning. Cut that $20 billion out, bring it home, take 10 off the debt, and put 10 into FEMA or whoever else needs it, child health care or whatever. But I'll tell you what, if we did that and took the air conditioning out of the green zone, our troops would come home, and that would make me happy.
Mr. Cain, along these same lines, Majority Leader Eric Cantor has said that federal disaster aid, this has been a big discussion of late, shouldn't be given out unless there are kind of concurrent spending cuts to offset the cost. Do you join in on that?
I believe that there's enough money to go around, and I believe that, yes, you can find the concurrent spending cuts in order to be able to do that. No, don't eliminate FEMA. Let's fix FEMA. Let's fix Homeland Security. There's a responsible way for the federal government to do the things that it should do. Running organizations like the TSA, I would agree with Representative Paul. No. Having the federal government responsible for trying to micromanage Medicare? No. Trying to micromanage education? No. The federal government is not good at micromanaging anything. This is why I believe in empowering the states to do more and limit what the federal government does with regard to those kinds of programs.
Governor Huntsman, you know, the upside to this is I guess you could fly with your shoes on. The downside is who does the job the next day?
Let me just say, while this is an important discussion that we're having, we've spent about 15 minutes now
on Homeland Security. The greatest gift we could give this country on the 10th year anniversary, Rick, is a Homeland Security Department that really works, that doesn't give people a sense when they walk through they're going to get shaken down, a department that doesn't make us all feel like there's a fortress security mentality that is not American. And I've got to say there's something wrong with that. But I'm guessing there are a whole lot of people tuned in around this country who are saying, why are we spending all this time talking about the smaller issues? We've got 14 million people unemployed. We've got millions more in this country who are so dispirited they've quit looking. This is a human tragedy that we're talking about. Moms and dads and families that completely go without. And all I would ask the people here and the people tuning in around this country, look at where we stand in terms of how we are going to get this country back on its feet. And I just want to point out that we have offered, based on where I've been and what I have done, as governor of a state where we became #1 in job creation, where we fixed the economy, made it the best economy for business in this entire country. We've got to get back on our feet. This is a crisis situation. While all these other issues are important, let's not lose sight, folks, of the bottom line here. We've got to get back in the game as a country. We've got to make this economy work.
Governor Perry, you can't have much of a workforce without a basis of education. As you know, your state ranks among the worst in the country in high school graduation rates, as we established. Yet you recently signed a budget cut for billions in education funding. You pushed for greater cuts that were in the budget that the legislature passed. You've said that education is a top priority, but explain cutting it the way you did, please.
Well, I think the reductions that we made were thoughtful reductions, and the fact of the matter is Texas has made great progress in the 10 years that I've been governor. From the standpoint of our graduation rates now are up to 84%, higher than they've been during any period of time before that. We're seeing the type of commitment. Our 4th and 8th grader, African American and Hispanics on the NAEPS test, they were some of the highest in the country. We're making progress. When you share the border with Mexico, and when you have as many individuals that we have coming into the state of Texas, we have a unique situation in our state. But the fact is, I stand by a record from what we've done with the resources that we've had, and I think that the reductions that we put in place were absorbed by our schools, and we will continue to have one of the finest workforces made available. When Caterpillar and Toyota and eBay and Facebook move to your state, it's not because you've got a workforce that's not capable.
Time, Governor. Speaker Gingrich, this reminds me of Race to the Top, the Obama administration education program. You supported it. Governor Perry opted out. Some people don't like it. What did you like about it?
I liked it very much the fact that it talked about charter schools. It's the one place I found to agree with President Obama. If every parent in America had a choice of the school their child went to, if that school had to report its scores, if there was a real opportunity, you'd have a dramatic improvement. I visited schools where 3 years earlier, there were fights, there were dropouts, there was no hope. They were taken over by a charter school in downtown Philadelphia, and all of a sudden the kids didn't fight anymore because they were disciplined. They were all asked every day, what college are you going to? Not are you going to go to college, what college are you going to? And so I am very much in favor of school choice. My personal preference would be to have a Pell Grant for K through 12 so that every parent could pick with their child any school they wanted to send them to, public or private, and enable them to have the choice. I don't think you're ever going to reform the current bureaucracies. And the president was, I thought, showing some courage in taking on the teachers union to some extent in offering charter schools. And I wanted, frankly, to encourage more development towards choice.
I want to introduce another line of questioning by introducing yet another colleague of ours, Jose Diaz-Balart from our sister network Telemundo. Hey, my friend, how are you?
Good evening. Nice to see you all. Nice to see you all. I want to talk about a subject that was very dear to the heart of President Reagan, which was immigration reform. As you know, he was the last U.S. president to sign immigration reform in 1986. All of you, I think, have said that you don't think immigration reform should be discussed until the border is secure. And, Governor, I'd like to ask you, border state governor, what specifically, in your mind, would make the border secure?
Well, the first thing you need to do is have boots on the ground. We've had a request into this administration since January of 2009 for 1,000 Border Patrol agents, our National Guard troops, and working towards 3,000 Border Patrol. That's just on the Texas border. There's another 50% more for the entire Mexican border. So you can secure the border, but it requires a commitment of the federal government of putting those boots on the ground, the aviation assets in the air. We think Predator drones could be flown, that real-time information coming down to the local and the state and the federal law enforcement, and you can secure the border. And at that particular point in time, then you can have an intellectually appropriate discussion about immigration reform. For the President of the United States to go to El Paso, Texas, and say that the border is safer than it's ever been, either he has some of the poorest intel of a president in the history of this country, or he was an abject liar to the American people. It is not safe on that border.
Governor, specifically, do you agree or disagree with some of the issues that the governor of Texas says as far as what you would consider enough to be able to declare the border safe?
Well, first, we got to have a fence. Secondly,
the whole fence, 2,600 miles.
We got to have a fence, or a technologically approved system to make sure that we know who's coming into the country, number one. Number two, we ought to have enough agents to secure that fence and to make sure that people are coming over caught. But the third thing, and I learned this when I was with Border Patrol agents in San Diego, and they said, look, they can always get a ladder to go over the fence, and people will always run to the country. The reason they come in such great numbers is because we've left the magnet on. And I said, what do you mean the magnet? And they said when employers are willing to hire people who are here illegally, that's a magnet and it draws them in. And we wanted to talk about sanctuary cities, giving tuition breaks to the kids of illegal aliens, employers that knowingly hire people that are here illegally. Those things also have to be stopped. If we want to secure the border, we have to make sure we have a fence, technologically determining where people are, enough agents to oversee it, and turn off that magnet. We can't talk about amnesty. We cannot give amnesty to those who come here illegally. We got 4.7 million people waiting in line legally. Let's let those people come in first, and those that are here illegally, they shouldn't have a special deal.
Speaker Gingrich, your perception on immigration reform, and you've been, I think, in some ways a little different on your initial position.
Well, look, I think we have to find a way to get to a country in which everybody who's here is here legally. But you started by referencing President Reagan.
That's right.
In 1986, I voted for the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which in fact did grant some amnesty in return for promises. President Reagan wrote in his diary that year that he signed the act because we were going to control the border and we were going to have an employer program where it was a legal guest worker program. That's in his diary. I'm with President Reagan. We ought to control the border. We ought to have a legal guest worker program. We ought to outsource it, frankly, to American Express, Visa, and MasterCard so there's no counterfeiting, which there will be with the federal government. We should be very tough on employers once you have that legal program. We should make English the official language of government. We should insist that first-generation immigrants who come here learn American history in order to become citizens. We should also insist that American children learn American history. And then we have to find a way to deal with folks who are already here, some of whom, frankly, have been here 25 years, are married with kids, live in our local neighborhood, go to our church. It's got to be done in a much more humane way than thinking you're going to automatically deport millions of people.
Senator, your solution?
Well, my solution is very similar to Newt Gingrich's. Look, I'm the son of an Italian immigrant. I think immigration is one of the great things that has made this country the dynamic country that it continues to be. People who are drawn because of the ideals of this country. And so we should not have a debate talking about how we don't want people to come to this country. But we want them to come here like my grandfather and my father came here. They made sacrifices. They came in the 1920s. There were no promises. There were no government benefits. They came because they wanted to be free and they wanted to be good law-abiding citizens. So we have to have a program in place that sets that parameter that says you're going to come to this country, come here according to the rules. It's a very good first step that the first thing you do here is a legal act, not an illegal act.
A quick follow-up, 30 seconds. So there are 11 million people that fait accompli. They're here. What do you do with them if you are able to secure the border?
Well, I think we can have that discussion, that whether what we do with people, how long they've been here, whether they have other types of records, but to have that discussion right now and pull the same trick that was pulled in 1986, we said, well, we'll promise to do this if you do that. No more. we are going to secure the border first, and that's the most important thing to do. And then we'll have the discussion afterwards.
Congresswoman, you've said the fence, that you believe the fence is fundamental as an integral part of controlling the border. Let's say that in 212 or 213, there's a fence, the border is secure, gasoline is $2 a gallon. What do you do then with 11 million people, as the Speaker says, many of whom have U.S.-born children here? What do you do?
Well, again, understand the context and the problem that we're dealing with. In Mexico right now, we're dealing with narco-terrorists. This is a very serious problem. To not build a border or a fence on every part of that border would be, in effect, to yield United States sovereignty not only to our nation anymore, but to yield it to another nation. That we cannot do. One thing that the American people have said to me over and over again, and I was just last week down in Miami. I was visiting the Bay of Pigs Museum with Cuban Americans. I was down at the Versailles Cafe. I met with a number of people, and it's very interesting. The Hispanic American community wants us to stop giving taxpayer-subsidized benefits to illegal aliens, and they want us to stop giving taxpayer-subsidized benefits to their children as well.
A quick 30-second rebuttal on the specific question. The fence is built. The border is under control. What do you do with 11.5 million people who are here without documents and with U.S.-born children?
Well, that's right. And again, it is sequential, and it depends upon where they live, how long they have been here, if they have a criminal record. All of those things have to be taken into place. But one thing that we do know, our immigration law worked beautifully back in the 1950s up until the early 1960s, when people had to demonstrate that they had money in their pocket, they had no contagious diseases, they weren't a felon, they had to agree to learn to speak the English language, they had to learn American history and the Constitution, and the one thing they had to promise is that they would not become a burden on the American taxpayer.
Thank you.
That's what we have to enforce.
Mr. Cain.
Let's make sure. Let's solve all of the problems. It's not one problem. I do believe we can secure the border with a combination of boots on the ground, technology, and a fence. But we got 3 other problems. And to get to we got to secure the border. Secondly, let's promote the path to citizenship that's already there. We don't need a new one. We just need to clean up the bureaucracy that's slowing the process down and discouraging people. Third thing we need to do, enforce the laws that are there. And the way we do it, empower the states. I believe that the people closest to the problem are the best ones to be able to solve that problem, empower the states to do what the federal government hasn't done, can't do, and won't do. This is how we solve the entire problem.
Thank you, Governor.
I would just have to say that I agree with so much of what has been said here today. President Reagan, when he made his decision back in 1987, he saw this as a human issue. And I hope that all of us, as we deal with this immigration issue, will always see it as an issue that revolves around real human beings. Yes, they came here in an illegal fashion, and yes, they should be punished in some form or fashion. I have 2 daughters who came to this country, one from China, one from India, legally. I see this issue through their eyes. We can find a solution. If President Reagan were here, he would speak to the American people, and he would lay out in hopeful, optimistic terms how we can get there, remembering full well that we're dealing with human beings here. We have to agree. But let me just say one thing about legal immigration. Let's not lose sight of the fact that our legal immigration system is broken.
That's right.
And if we want to do something about attracting brain power to this country, if we want to lift real estate values, for example, why is it that Vancouver is the fastest growing real estate market in the world today? They allow immigrants in legally, and it lifts all boats, and we need to focus as much on legal immigration.
Congressman, your thought?
Obviously, it's a very big problem. I think we need to remove the incentive, easy road to citizenship. Nobody has mentioned the fact that they qualify for benefits as well, you know, the welfare benefits that we shouldn't have to give them. The state of Texas shouldn't be forced to provide free health care and free education. But there is a mess down there. It's a big mess, and it's the drug war that's going on there, and our drug laws are driving this. So now we're killing thousands and thousands of people. That makes it much more complicated. But the people who want big fences and guns, sure, we could secure the borders. A barbed wire fence with machine guns, that would do the trick. I don't believe that's what America is all about. I just really don't. We can enforce our law. If we had a healthy economy, this wouldn't be such a bad deal. People are worrying about jobs. But every time you think about this toughness on the border and ID cards and real IDs, think that it's a penalty against the American people, too. I think this fence business is designed and may well be used against us and keep us in. In economic turmoil, the people want to leave with their capital, and there's capital controls and there's people control. So every time you think of a fence keeping all those bad people out, think about those fences maybe being used against us, keeping us in.
To my colleague, Jose Diaz-Balart, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take our final break now. When we come back, the final portion of our debate from the Reagan Presidential Library right after this.